In the basement where the main character was, nothing had changed for years. He was surrounded only by old furniture and things, the only sound he could hear. There were bugs that flew into him through the ventilation. Nothing else. Complete silence. He envied them because it seemed to him that they were free. The guy tried to kill them because he thought it was unfair. He killed all living creatures that somehow miraculously got into his room. And after that, he looked at them for a long time. In addition, he was constantly tormented by terrible hunger. And even then, he tried to console himself with bugs. It was all for the sake of survival. It was very unpleasant, but he had no other choice and had to endure it. He had to spend his whole life like this and fight every day. He had absolutely nothing. His only home was the basement. All his life, he had dreamed of leaving this place and had already come up with a plan for what to do next. He had prepared a text that he was going to read after he left this place. Although he had not studied at school, he could write and knew that any speech began with his own name. But he did not know his own name because he had never heard it before. However, he was sure that he had it. He had a photo of his parents, which he sometimes looked at and cried at. He knew that the mother who gave birth to him should have given him a name at birth. He was analyzing a photo of him as a small child, and he understood that his mother was a very beautiful woman. He thought that she loved him because she seemed very happy in that photo. Suddenly, a man entered and shouted that his mother was dead. He was terrible in appearance and wore large glasses that did not cover his eyes. When he approached the boy began to tremble with fear and tried to hide from him. The man began to talk about how his mother had died long before he was born. She had jumped from a bridge. And when he saw the boy's reaction and how he was starting to get angry, he smiled. In fact, this man was his father. But at the same time, he was a real monster. He was a ruthless scumbag who locked him here in this basement. He did it only so that the boy would not escape. And all the time he watched him, following his every step. In the house where he lived, there were a lot of doors which were also locked and a long corridor. The man never parted with the keys. He always carried them with him. They were always next to him. He laughed and promised the boy that he would die in the basement anyway. He had never been outside. He began to tell him about the reason why his mother committed suicide. He heard this story many times, and each time he got angry with his own father. And he brought him food and forced him to eat so that he would not simply die of hunger. The boy tried to say goodbye, but he simply had no other choice. The man explained that she died because she was afraid of the world around her, so the land on which they lived. It was very cruel and big. There was nothing good on it. The mother knew that terrible times were coming, and people would have to fight for their own lives, because an apocalypse was coming in which they would have to survive for many years. He explained his actions by the fact that he loved the boy and tried to save his life. He did not want his son to do the same as his wife, so he did not let him leave the room. But he didn't like it at all and cried every time he started thinking about it. The father was convinced that his mother had chosen such a fate for herself because she was simply scared. The boy screamed and made him stop because he didn't want to hear about it anymore. The man tried to convince him, but he wasn't going to let him go anywhere. He carefully read the text that the boy had written and simply burned it. The man did it very cruelly, right in front of his eyes. And the child started crying and tried to stop him. It was in vain. Only ashes remained from his efforts to write a notebook. He will never love his own father, and I don't believe that he really didn't exist. There was nothing good in this man. He never supported him or listened to him. When the time came when he took the boy with him and ordered him not to leave even a step. This happened every day, for years, his whole life. Every day, at the same time, they moved along the same corridor, in one direction. He tried to listen and hear at least something, but he did not hear a single living cry in the huge house. He, with his father, were the only ones. The only people who were in this large basement. His father brought him to a classroom where there was a large blackboard on which you could write with chalk. He tried to teach him something new and told him about the basic laws and concepts. He taught and trained him every day so that the boy would be smart and not lag behind. At these moments, he was satisfied because this was the only thing that kept him from getting bored. The boy loved to study because it gave him pleasure. There was a huge library in the basement where there were many books. He could choose any one for himself and read it in his free time. But his favorite books were those that described the world around him. He imagined it and dreamed that one day he would be able to get out of the basement himself, to see all the beauty that was described with his own eyes. He dreamed of the sun and believed that its rays were much warmer than the light from a lamp. But the feeling of reality constantly brought him back from those sweet dreams. He always dreamed, at least for one day, of being a normal boy. Most of all, he would like to live a normal life, to see beautiful landscapes, to make new friends and socialize with other people. However, there was something that was most important to him, and what he was going to do after he escaped. He wanted to take revenge on his own father and never return to the basement again. when the man saw his books about the environment when he was cruelly punishing him. The boy was forbidden to read books about the environment. Even though he knew that they were his favorite, the man forbade him to read them. He tried to do everything possible so that the boy would never want to go outside again. He would never let him leave the basement and go outside. The man believed that the apocalypse was about to begin very soon, during which everything would burn and turn to ashes. There would be nothing living in the world anymore. He wanted the boy to understand that this basement was his only chance for survival. However, the little boy did not believe him. He considered him a psychopath who kept him here by force. Moreover, he was going to continue this until the end of his days and even mocked him. But he believed that he could escape, counting on nothing. Therefore now, he needed to prepare. At any cost, he had to survive and take revenge after he escaped. It was necessary to wait for the moment when the man would stop being so vigilant. Then he could use it and lay out its keys, which would give him a chance to escape. His days were the same. Every day he trained hard to be stronger. His father made him do this every day because he wanted to prepare him for the beginning of the apocalypse. He made him do various exercises with huge weights. Despite the fact that it was difficult for the boy when he did not feel sorry for him. From the heavy exercises, he could barely stand on his feet, and he lost consciousness many times. But the old man beat him in the face and only forced him to continue. Every day his weight became heavier, and it seemed that the man began to help him. This impressed the boy so much that he forgot about the pain and fatigue. It seemed that the man had changed because for the first time he took his hand. But it was not at all so. Hopes were in vain. With all his strength, he pushed him forward. He began to mock the boy and gave him a strong blow to the stomach. Then, he hit him in the stomach again, so hard that the boy began to choke. The man threw him to the ground. The blow was so strong that the main character flew several meters away from him. He began to roll and broke the mirror that was standing on the ground. This was a lesson he had to learn. His father warned him that he should never trust people who offered him a helping hand. And that's why he mercilessly mocked him, calling it training. In addition, the man taught him fighting techniques. After all, he was convinced that during the apocalypse, the boy had to protect himself and fight off enemies who would attack him. The man constantly beat the boy and made fun of him, calling it training. But this time, the blow was so strong that the boy lost consciousness again. This really broke the man, and he decided to end the training. He was angry, so he just turned around and left so as not to make him even worse. However, the boy was ready for this and was just waiting for the moment to strike. And when this moment came, when he was ready to do what he had been preparing for all his life. With all his strength, he got to his feet and started running towards him. In his hands was a sharp piece of glass. He was getting closer, and he was ready to strike as hard as he could. It was the moment when his father completely relaxed, and he dreamed that right now, he could kill him and take away the keys that would give him a chance to escape and be free. The boy swung and was about to strike. He had already started to smile because he thought that it would finally work and he would be able to kill his father. The sharp glass was gradually approaching his head. It seemed that right now, everything was going to work out. However, not everything was so simple. He did not understand the main thing. His father was someone who never lost his vigilance, and even when he stood with his back to him, he saw his every move and never lost his vigilance. Therefore, for him, it was just a test, after which a cruel punishment awaited him. At the last moment, the man managed to turn around and found himself right in front of him. The guy realized that he was in a hopeless situation, and now he had no other chance. The man was very scary, he was a real monster, but the guy, even despite this, did not want to retreat and tried to do at least something. He tried to hit him, but nothing worked. His father managed to easily dodge it. The blow passed by, and the main character realized that now he was in a very difficult situation, because the man could get behind him. That's exactly what he did, after which he dealt a strong blow to him right in the face. I was so strong and powerful that he didn't even understand anything. His eyes closed and he saw only a bright flash. It is unclear how much time passed, but in his dream, he heard strange sounds that resembled drops of water. Suddenly, he opened his eyes after a nightmare that he had. He realized that he was in the same place. His room had not changed. It was just water, but this time it scared him very much. Suddenly, he heard the voice of his own father, who was also inside his room. The man began to praise him for being very good and tried to kill him, because it was really very sudden and he was pleased that he could learn so much. He was holding a piece of glass in his hands, which the boy wanted to attack him with. This was the weapon he was going to use, so now he was waiting for an even harsher punishment. His training volume was to be doubled. He was weak, so the man allowed him to rest a little. And the next day, he was going to make a real hell for him. The man left, leaving his son alone. The little one knew something that his father was not aware of. When the lights were turned off, the room was very quiet for a few seconds. At that moment, he could adjust his hearing, and he was very attentive. After many years of such training, his hearing had become very sharp. Now, he could hear something he had never been able to hear before. The sound was very far away from him, and it resembled the rotation of wheels. He thought that these were the sounds of wildlife that was outside the walls of his basement. He could not imagine wildlife in a city that could be so alive and noisy. For many years of such experiments, he managed to understand only two things. When his father made him sleep and said that it was night outside. In fact, it was daytime on the surface, and all people were living their normal lives. Another truth was that there was no apocalypse in the world, and in fact, all people lived in peace. And his father used this only to keep him captive and not allow him to go to the surface. It was at this moment that he wanted to get out of here the most, and try to find his mother. After all, he did not believe that his father was telling the truth and that she was really dead, because he always repeated the same thing and said that his mother had never lived and died right after he was born. However, he thought that in fact, there was another hidden meaning in his words. Thoughts about this did not let him sleep peacefully. He was 100% sure that she was alive and was waiting for him to save her. He was still weak, so he decided to sleep, and fell asleep with the thought that he would definitely find her. Meanwhile, his father was walking away from his room. He was smiling on the way, but suddenly stopped. His phone started ringing, but he understood that it was still too early for this call. Nevertheless, despite this, he decided to pick up the phone. The man did not understand what had happened and why he was being called, because he was supposed to talk on the phone only at certain hours. At this time, his son was sleeping and did not even suspect anything. And his father was saying something very quietly and incomprehensibly. It seemed that it was about his son because he stopped. The man even thought about turning back, but he couldn't move after what he heard. As it turned out, someone's life depended on him now, and he allowed the person to stay alive. His phone fell to the ground and broke. The man threw himself on the ground and started crying. He covered his head with his hands and tried to calm down. However, nothing worked. He simply couldn't calm down and come to his senses. The boy heard his screams and crying. He was asleep, but he understood through his dream that something was wrong with him. In the end, he woke up and couldn't believe where he was. He heard his own father's voice, who was somewhere nearby. He was saying something incomprehensible and kept saying the same thing over and over again. He tried to move, but realized that he simply could not do it. Trying to move, he realized that he had lost control of his own body. And lowering his head, he saw that he was tied up and could not move. He saw his own father standing in front of him and wanted him to explain to him what was happening to him, but the old man only laughed in response to him. He did not even listen to the boy who hoped to shout to him. Therefore, he had no choice but to try to free himself on his own. The boy tensed his whole body and hoped that he would be able to break the ropes. In addition, his father was in front of him, watching what was happening. He was rude and ordered him in a harsh voice to stop doing this. The man approached him so quickly that the main character almost died of fear. His breathing became very heavy and he tried to calm down. The boy remembered his words that today's training would be twice as difficult. However, the man was serious and said that his plans had changed. Today, they would not do anything anymore. But this would happen not only today. All the following days, they will not do anything. Training and his training was over. He said that the boy will not be able to do anything else except sit on a chair, and from these words, he began to scream. He tried to convince him not to do this, but the man interrupted and did not let him finish. The boy did not understand what came over him and why the man made such a decision. After all, being tied up, he would not be able to do anything at all. And then, one could forget about saving his mother. From fear and hatred, he began to shake and tried to free himself. The scum looked at him in surprise and did not understand what he wanted to do with it. But he strained with all his might and tried to break the ropes. They began to crack, however, his efforts were not enough. It seemed that the man understood what exactly he was trying to do and why he was shaking so much. He looked at him for a long time and tried to contain his anger. And suddenly, the boy calmed down. He was afraid to even look in his direction. Noticeably, the man began to get nervous. His laughter became hysterical. The boy looked at him with eyes full of fear and could not believe that his own father was in front of him. The man resembled a real demon. He screamed and did not calm down. Suddenly, the main character froze. He had a feeling that right now, something very terrible was about to happen. With all his strength, the man pounced on him and dealt him a strong blow right in the face. It was so strong and sudden that the boy did not even understand anything. He simply fell to the floor and for some time did not even move. The man was not going to leave him alone. He slowly began to walk towards him. He picked him up and started talking to the boy again, looking him straight in the eyes. The man smiled and forbade him to move. Now he had to sit only in this position. The boy endured and tried not to show how scared he was. In front of him stood a man who was not going to let him go and continued to laugh. He could not stand it any longer. Despite the threats and beatings, he began to break free again. and suddenly another blow, much stronger than the previous one. This time he was on the ground again, and the man did not stop smiling. The boy lay and could hardly hold back his tears. He wanted to cry. It became clear that his situation was very difficult. He made another attempt, but his father was adamant. Another blow, right in his face. He understood. Something was definitely wrong with his father. A real demon had taken possession of him. After all, he had never been like that before. It would have been much wiser to start following his rules and just wait for him to become softer towards him. However, the boy chose a different option, and because of his choice, he suffered from beatings from his side every day. But that very moment became special for him, because he did not want to give up and lose to him again, even at the cost of his own life. His father put him in a cage and did not allow him to leave it when he wanted to. While there, he felt anger and hatred towards him. After all, he was the one who locked him in a cage and made him suffer. Every day, he hated him more and more. He threw him tied up in a room, and only a few days later, he managed to free himself. When he was able to do this, he immediately felt a strong excitement that he had never felt before. He became curious to see his father's appearance. At this moment, when he was so happy and was able to free himself, he felt free. It seemed that he would be very angry. The boy even started to smile. But suddenly, out of nowhere, his father appeared and struck. The man was going to punish him for being able to free himself and now dared to laugh at him. The boy managed to see his face before the blow, and he understood that by his action, he managed to make him very angry. But this time, he saw something, what he had never noticed before. There were tears in his eyes. He always tried to hide his emotions from his son and never allowed himself to cry. But this time, he could not do it. In addition, he seemed very scared and even afraid of himself. However, what happened to him and why did he look like that at that moment? The boy did not have time to ask him a question because the man hit him painfully right in the chest. He began to fall to the ground, and he realized that he was losing consciousness and could not get up. Gradually, his eyes began to close, and the boy began to fall asleep. The last thing he saw in front of him was the figure of his own father who was approaching him. The man told him about the rules of survival that he taught him every day. Among them all, the most important rule always remained rule number 1. He was never allowed to leave the basement. His father was convinced that nowhere in the world was as safe as here. After all, there were thousands of protective mechanisms in the basement that had been working for many years. In addition, there was a lot of food and other resources that he had collected over many years. Therefore, trying to leave this place where everything was ready is the same as committing suicide. In addition, the apocalypse could happen at any moment. Therefore, he could never leave this place. Suddenly, the main character began to come to his senses. He did not remember what happened to him. And how did he get to this place in the first place, and why was there no father nearby to watch over him? This had never happened before, because his father only disappeared when he went to bed. At other times, he was always there for him. The protagonist realized that his father had started behaving very strangely the day before hitting him. Therefore, he thought about what could have happened and why his father had become so strange. Maybe it was because of his cyclical lifestyle? But subconsciously, the boy understood that soon something terrible was going to happen, and he was convinced that his guesses were correct. Suddenly, all the doors opened, and even the door to his cage was no longer locked. Absolutely, the entire house opened. He simply could not believe his eyes and immediately thought that it could be some kind of trap. But he could not waste time anymore, so he gathered his strength and tried to escape. He understood that this opportunity could come to him only once in his life, so he was going to use it. The guy began to run away through the tangled corridors of the house. He ran with all the strength he had and was even afraid to turn back. The corridor was very long and tangled, but he knew in which direction the ladder was. His father would have prevented him from running, but he was not here right now. Absolutely all the doors in the house were open. This was what he feared the most. The boy was scared, and it seemed to him that his father could appear from anywhere. He simply knew how sick his father was, and even this could be a test for him. However, he did not lose hope because he had already managed to reach the ladder. This was the way to his exit, so he firmly decided to move only uphill. Therefore, he quickly began to climb, and he hoped that it was not a dream. Ahead, he saw light and hoped that it was the sun that he had read about in books. The boy opened the hatch, and the bright sunlight blinded him. He began to climb to the surface and was glad that he was finally able to be among people. The boy moved forward, but his eyes were closed. He heard noise around him, and he was very scared to open his eyes, but when he did, you couldn't believe your eyes. Around him, everything was alive, just like he had always dreamed of. It was a living city where there were a huge pile of cars. The city was bustling with life, and there were a lot of people on the street just like him. The main character couldn't believe that he had finally managed to do it. He managed to fulfill his dream and leave the basement. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice. The main character was standing in the middle of the road, and a man driving a car stopped to warn him about it. When he saw a living person in front of him, he couldn't believe his eyes, and his behavior surprised the man very much. He could not even think that his appearance would surprise the main character so much. But suddenly, he started having a terrible thought about me. He thought about his own father. He believed that the psychopath could follow him, so he needed to get as far away from the basement as possible. The boy started running and looked at the city around him. This is what he had dreamed of all his life, so he could not hold back a smile on his face. Finally, he managed to do it. Now he truly felt like a free man. He could not imagine what was happening in the basement now. After all, he did not even know if there were other people there, whom his father also held by force. And suddenly, the thought of it made him stop. He didn't know why the door had opened so suddenly. Maybe it was a glitch or some other breakdown in the security system? Because this had never happened before, and the door didn't open by itself. The only thing that came to mind was that his father could have opened it on purpose. However, he tried to dissuade himself from this thought, because his father was the one who had forbidden him to leave the basement. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to other people who were in the middle of the street. They looked very happy. A lot of children were smiling and talking to each other. They had no idea what horror the main character had endured to reach the surface. He watched the little children smiling and playing briefly with their parents. He never thought that parents could be so good and loved their children. His attention was drawn to a red ball of air. And seeing the life that was raging on the street, he realized that all his father's words were lies. He saw the sun and the blue sky, exactly what was described in the books. But suddenly, in one moment, everything changed. He remembered the words of his father who said that the apocalypse would come at the very moment when they would not expect it. Birds began to fly into the air. The situation was becoming very restless and many people turned their attention. Never before had they seen such frightened animals in the middle of the city square. And the ball just kept rising into the air. Suddenly, everyone turned their attention to the sun. They noticed that something strange, like an eclipse, was happening to it. Some huge thing covered the sun with itself. It looked like the moon, but a completely different color. In addition, there were huge tentacles that reached the ground. They increased in size very quickly. Thousands of people saw them with their own eyes. Children standing on the street saw something strange approaching them. And now they realized that it was not the moon at all, and not an eclipse at all, and in fact, something much worse. At this moment, many people started screaming, and a huge flash appeared in the sky, blinding everyone around. In fact, it was a huge monster that was trying to swallow the earth with its huge teeth. The main character watched what was happening and could not understand why you were all so afraid. However, he was also very scared. He saw a huge number of monsters trying to get to the ground. They were very close, and now they were clearly visible. He again remembered his words and the fact that he was never allowed to leave the basement. After all, this was the only rule that could guarantee survival. He also remembered the words that the location of the basement could not be revealed to the enemy. It was at this moment that the mutant tentacles penetrated the sewer, and they were moving towards his basement. He began to understand that his father's foundation could be true, and the lessons and safety rules he had told him about were not just like that. Now he saw the monsters with his own eyes, and they were in the basement. There were a lot of them, scary looking and incomprehensible. People simply froze and did not even run away. They only silently watched as their city was filled with terrible mutants. These were aliens, the number of which was only growing. A crowd gathered around them, and suddenly tentacles swallowed one of the men who was standing among other people. They began to pull him towards them and did not let go. The poor man did not understand what was happening, but could not free himself and began to scream from fear. In front of him, he saw sharp teeth and a huge mouth of a monster that was about to bite him. And after the bite, only his head remained, which fell at the feet of other people and rolled across the city square. Seeing this, the frightened people began to run away and scatter around the city. They pushed each other because everyone tried to save themselves and escape. However, there were those who did not even suspect what had happened. And because they did not have time to escape, they became one of the victims of the terrible mutants. The mutants were gigantic and very terrible in appearance. They threw huge rocks at people on the streets, which simply continued to attack people, leaving them no chance of escape. In addition, among the monsters, there were other freaks who jumped at people from the air and could cut them into pieces in a few seconds. Only parts of the bodies remained from the people, which were scattered on the street. None had a chance to escape or hide from the mutants who were watching them. The streets of the city were strewn with a huge number of human bodies. The losses were so huge that they could not be estimated. He heard only the screams of frightened people who begged for help and wanted to hide. And at that moment, he began to realize that his father was not mistaken, but could have told the truth all along. And now when he saw everything with his own eyes, his father said that when the apocalypse comes, blood and chaos will reign in the world. A minute ago, there were a lot of people on the streets and nothing foreshadowed trouble. But now, everything was exactly as the man had told him. And all this was happening right before his eyes. The mutants were so huge that he simply did not understand how it was possible to hide from them at all. In the middle of the city, he saw a huge column of monsters. It resembled a tornado. The boy fell to the ground and could not get up. He did not know what to do in such situations and began to tremble with fear. In addition, he had already begun to think about his own mother, whom he considered dead, and he did not know if this time his father really told the truth. He began to run and do it the way other people did. But this was not enough, because the wave of mutants was much faster. People were surrounded on all sides, simply dying one after another. The boy stopped, but suddenly he realized that someone had grabbed his hand. Opening his eyes, he saw his own father in front of him, who had reappeared from nowhere. He didn't understand how it happened, but the man was dragging him along. Together with him, they began to run away, trying to save themselves. His father shouted to him to hurry up and do everything as he would order. The boy didn't know, and doubted whether it was worth following him and obeying him. But when the man died again before his eyes, who didn't even have time to hide and run away from the mutants, then he realized that he simply had no other choice, and now he should think about where he could hide. The boy looked around, and now he began to panic. His father sharply turned the corner of the house. He had no choice, so he did the same and ran in his direction. They ended up on another street, but there were also a lot of mutants there. They had to change direction again and go around the monsters on the other side. They made a sharp turn and changed their route. Their goal was to get to the bridge, which was about to collapse. It seemed that no one except his father was moving in that direction, so if they broke through, they would have a chance to escape. However, there were a lot of monsters there, killing people. The boy tried not to look, so as not to see the horror that was happening. And finally, they managed to overcome the most dangerous section of the road. They found themselves on the bridge, and it seemed that the road ahead was clear. But suddenly, on the other side, he saw monsters that began to approach them. It was necessary to hurry because Monster was very fast. And quickly, I will be able to catch up with people. Father explained that this was the only way out of the city and the only way to save themselves, because the bridge could lead them to a part of the city where the population was much smaller. It is not there that they will have a chance to save themselves and stay alive. But it was not so easy to do this because the boy began to lag behind. In addition, the monsters drew attention to them and began to pursue them, leaving other people behind. Suddenly, something grabbed his leg. He immediately felt a strong pain and understood that he could no longer move because it prevented him from going further. And if he did not take it off right now, he would die, without a chance of salvation. But then his father appeared. It seemed that he was able to read his thoughts. After all, he was holding a healthy stone in his hands and hit it directly at the monster. And he untied himself and freed his leg, falling from the bridge into the water. The main character looked at his leg and still felt severe pain and burning. However, the man understood that they had little time and it was worth hurrying. Despite the fact that his leg was swollen, it was worth continuing to run and not stopping. At this moment, he was very serious and looked straight into the boy's eyes. The monsters were approaching and began to devour everything around them. There was still a little bit left. He tried to get up, but he couldn't. His body started shaking again. He tried not to show it, but he was very scared. With each step, he felt only stronger pain. Finally, an understanding came to him that soon the monsters would catch up with him, because the distance between them was very small and gradually only decreased. The severe pain prevented him from moving further and he fell again. Now he had already stopped believing that he could save himself and escape. Suddenly, he turned his attention to his own father. The man was standing right in front of him and seemed to be very serious. He ordered him to run, but I don't want to anymore. He didn't have the strength. He believed that his son could be saved if he continued to run. However, even in this situation, the boy didn't believe him, because he considered his father a real traitor who didn't pay attention to him all his childhood and always locked him in a cage, depriving him of freedom. And even in this situation, when it seemed that he wanted to help, the boy was convinced that he was just trying to fool him. But suddenly he saw what had happened before. The man again extended his hand to him. He remembered that in the past it was just a test and he shouldn't trust him again. He wasn't going to take his hand. The man tried to explain that it was worth running away and he was just trying to do it so that he would have a chance to escape. But it was all in vain. The guy didn't believe him, not a word. The man understood that it was worth acting. He couldn't let him die like that. Therefore, regardless of what had happened between them, he grabbed his hand. And with all his strength, he pulled him towards him, forcing him to get up, and shouted after him to run away and not stop until he was on the other side. He only said that he had a plan and promised to tell him everything later. And suddenly he noticed that there was a note in his hand, which his father had left him when he grabbed his hand. Most likely this was his plan. The guy understood that there was very little time left, so he started to run away. He thought that his father was moving after him, and I hoped that they both could escape. But suddenly, he saw a shadow in front of him and realized that something terrible would happen soon. The bridge could no longer withstand such a huge load and its supports began to break. It became clear that everything could collapse and he risked falling into the abyss. At that moment, the bridge began to sway and break into pieces. Everything flew to the bottom, cars and people, and he still managed to get to the other side and now just watched as everything collapsed. The boy was breathing heavily and realized that he had seen his father for the last time right there. On the bridge, he did not have time to run away with him. Now, after he realized what had happened, he stood for a long time without moving and could not come to his senses. He did not understand what had really happened, and why had the bridge broken and not held up. However, he remembered his father's last words, which said that he had a chance to survive and be saved. Was that really what he had meant? But why did he do that and not go with him? Why did his father arrange such a test for him and keep him in the basement all his life? What was all this for? Now he was confused and did not understand anything anymore. Out of powerlessness, he sat on the edge of the bridge and looked at the city that was destroyed. But he managed to survive, and what to do next, he did not know. But what should he do now? In which direction should he move? He thought, but could not understand what he had survived for. But now, it did not matter to him at all, because he had lost his goal and dream, which he had lived for all his life. The life he imagined upstairs was completely different. Everything had disappeared. There was no more peaceful life. The beauty of the surrounding world and the city was completely different from the books he had read. And also, he had lost his last hope of seeing his mother and finding her. Realizing this, he could no longer hold back and began to cry. Tears began to flow from his eyes. He had only one question for his own father. Why had he come so far? Was it all to save him? After all, the boy was left alone. And he no longer understood the meaning of living in this world without hope. Now it was hell, not the paradise he had imagined for himself for many years. Suddenly, he remembered the note his father had given him. It was still in his hand and he didn't know what was written there. Maybe that was his plan, how he could save not only himself, but the whole world. It was right in front of him, in his hand. At that moment, he became very scared. He stared at it for a long time before daring to read. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise and realized that something was approaching him. At that moment, a few meters away, he saw a mutant who had managed to survive the bridge collapse. Realizing this, he got to his feet and with all his might began to run away, trying to save himself. But his legs still hurt, so he endured incredible pain. He approached the edge of the bridge and looked into the deep abyss, assessing his chances of survival. And the mutant was already standing at full height and was about to attack him. However, he simply had no other choice, and therefore, he decided on this desperate step and jumped. He fell to the ground and began to roll painfully. The zombie did not lag behind him, but continued to pursue even in this state. His body trembled and he felt that he could not get up. But he made incredible efforts to save himself. The boy understood that he could not stand on his feet, and his endurance was over. He even lost hope and thought that he would no longer be able to escape from the bridge and would die anyway. He was in a daze and could not help but cry. The boy convinced himself that he had nothing left. The only thing in his hand was a note from his own father. And he dared to read and opened the note to read. His mother was alive. Meanwhile, the monster was approaching him and was already standing at full height. He had hope again, which pushed him and made him get up. He realized that he wanted to live and would not give up. On the contrary, he decided to fight and do everything in his power to try to win. But when he saw a huge monster in front of him, which opened its mouth and looked straight at him, he realized that it was impossible. In addition, his father constantly said that no one would be able to survive during the apocalypse. He believed that they would not have enough strength and skills to protect themselves and survive in this world. And now he thought about how he, a weak boy, could defeat the monster, which was much bigger and stronger than him. In addition, after the apocalypse, there were many other threats in the world, which could kill a person at any moment. At that moment, Monster approached the boy and was about to strike. He did not know what to do in such a situation. He tried to remember the years of his father, who taught him to protect himself and dodge such attacks. However, he did not believe that he would be able to do it. After all, everything his father said, it turned out to be true. And now, he only thought about giving up and giving up. But the thought of his own mother and the fact that she could remain alive did not give him peace and did not allow him to give up. Therefore, he had to fight. At the last moment, he decided to jump to the side. He managed to retreat from the line of attack and save his life. In addition, he pushed him away from him and ended up with the monster behind his back. A lot of dust formed after the impact, but he was unharmed. The boy could not believe that he had managed to deceive the mutant and stay alive. This meant that he was different from other people, and his father's words were also true. The father believed that the biggest difference between him and other people was that he knew how to survive. He was convinced that his son would not give up, and all his training and experience would not be in vain. At that moment, he grabbed a sharp thorn that was on the ground and began to wait until the monster decided to hit him again. And when that moment came, he jumped up and gathered his strength to attack. The blow was accurate, right to the head, so strong that his skull cracked and monster was dead. After what happened, the whole city was destroyed. There were a lot of monsters on the streets. Those who managed to stay alive were hiding among the ruins of their own houses and did not know what to do next. 4 days had passed since the beginning of the alien invasion, but the city authorities had not started to do anything. They were very lucky that they were able to survive at all and hide in this place, but their food and water supplies were quickly running out. Therefore, most likely, they would have to look for another shelter and risk their lives. Most people were very tired and did not even want to talk, but everyone knew that they could not delay because death would simply await them. Many people were fighting among themselves for food. Everyone was scared and tired, and one woman was really annoying. She never ordered a Coke and kept talking nonsense, which really annoyed the men and friends around her. There were also a lot of injured people in the crowd, but no one could help them because they didn't have any first aid kits or other medical supplies. At that rate, they could just go crazy. Suddenly, the guy saw a girl behind him who turned to him. She was hungry, she was trying to find food, but she couldn't. Therefore, in order to stay in this relatively safe place, something had to be done. First of all, she had to find food. However, there was one more place that they did not check, and she decided to go there herself to try to find food. The man looked at her. He could not believe that she could be so brave. He was afraid to let her go alone, but he thanked her and decided to do it. He understood that people did not want to take care of each other and help. They were all concerned only with themselves and thought only about their own survival. And she was the only one who decided to help and do at least something. Therefore, he had hope again and began to believe that he could survive and find a new and safe place. The girl went to search. She was going to check the room in the house, which was a ruin. But when she got there, she saw 2 unknown people. She looked at her in surprise because they did not expect to see anyone alive here. She asked if they had found food here. And at that moment, the couple looked at each other. The woman took out a bag of food that she had found among the stones. When the girl saw this, she laughed and realized that she was right. But suddenly she began to open the bag, and she did it right in front of her eyes. Together with her boyfriend, they ate all the food that was inside. The girl began to scream because she did not understand why they did this and did not share it with others. But she did not see her guilt in what she had done. The girl knew that the previous day, they had eaten some of the supplies, shared them with them. So now, she wanted her to start helping other people too. They didn't want to listen to her because she threatened to tell everything she had learned. However, the guy couldn't let that happen and started threatening her, and warned her that if she did, they wouldn't just sit back and do nothing. But that didn't scare her. She was sure she could escape from them. And at that very moment, she started running. Suddenly, they heard a scream that was very loud. The woman was scared but tried to calm herself and her husband. She convinced him that the voice was coming from a very far distance and that it didn't threaten them. But suddenly, the scream was repeated and they started searching. And they saw the same girl sitting in another part of the house and screaming loudly. He started laughing at her because a few seconds ago she was so confident. He even called her a coward who could not do anything. But when she was sitting between the stones, they saw a small candy that was between the stones. After a while, she had already returned to her friend. He asked if she had managed to find anything, and she took out the candy that was hidden in her pocket. However, at the last moment, she changed her mind and decided to keep it for herself because she was very hungry and wanted to eat. Behind him was a terrible mutant who began to approach him. The girl sat on the ground and tried to come to herself and come to her senses. She was trembling, but she knew that she had to run away. When she raised her head, she saw that the mutant had crushed him with his own weight. He begged for help and reached out to her. The man begged her to stay and help him get out, but she did not listen to him and began to run away, saving her own life. He did not understand why she did this to him because they were friends. But at that moment, she thought only of herself and wanted to save her life. The couple also noticed the dancing and began to run away. They tried not to turn around, and all the time they ran just after the girl. But suddenly she stopped because they saw a huge mutant right in the middle of the road. But they were not going to stop because they wanted to use her as bait in order to save themselves. And when they caught the girl, they would simply move aside. The woman began to rejoice when she saw that the girl did not stop. She ran straight towards the monster, and the one who had stretched out his large tentacles tried to catch her. However, he did not manage to do this. She easily dodged his attacks and remained unharmed. He did not manage to touch her, and now she was ready to continue running further. Being behind, they realized that they had made a terrible mistake. because now the content was moving straight at them and it seemed like it wasn't going to stop. They were so shocked and scared that they didn't notice another enemy approaching them from behind. The girl was able to break away and hide behind the house. She could only hear their screams and understood that now they were dead. But suddenly, turning her head, she saw the main character in front of her. His appearance scared her very much, and she even pushed him away and jumped back. But she very quickly realized that he didn't even react. She immediately thought that he was dead. After all, when a new monster appeared and started moving in their direction, the boy didn't even react to him. She trembled with fear and thought about leaving him here and running away. She also understood that monster heard her voice and would soon be able to find and kill her. Therefore, it was necessary to make a decision as quickly as possible, and she looked at the guy for a long time. Still, she could not leave him and pulled him to her, trying to bring him to his senses. She looked him straight in the eye and asked him not to make any noise and to remain calm. But when he saw her in front of him, he jumped aside. He did not know who she really was and what she was trying to do to him. The girl started laughing and tried to explain that in reality she only wanted to help him. However, he did not forget his father's words, and even at that moment, he treated her words with distrust. She began to say that she simply hid him from the monster that was chasing him. But he did not believe a single word of her, but only saw before his eyes his own father, who had taught him these rules. The situation was very difficult. He did not know what to do in such a situation. Therefore, he simply fell to the ground and tried to come up with a plan of action. The boy was very hungry because the last time he ate was in the basement a few days ago. He tried to save his energy, but now he felt that he could not stand it anymore. For the first time in my life, he managed to meet a person so close to him, and he hoped that she might have food. It seemed that the girl understood him and knew that he was hungry even without words. A cookie fell out of her pocket. The main character noticed it immediately. However, he did not know what it really was, because he had never seen anything like it. The girl was nervous and began to sweat from fear because she did not know how to explain her situation. The main character did not stop thinking about it. What was the suspicious object? But hunger tormented him. His stomach grumbled. Suddenly, he decided to ask directly, was that mysterious object food? She immediately answered that it was not. And now he began to think about what he could have done wrong. And she realized that in fact, he was an idiot because he could not even distinguish food. However, he remembered his father's words again and began to scream and accuse her of lying. He was not going to believe a person, and now this rule worked. She was mistaken if she thought that he would believe her because it was obvious that people could only lie. The girl covered her ears with her hands and realized that she was mistaken because the main character was even more stupid than she had immediately thought. However, from her reaction, he was sure that it was definitely food and he needed it. If she interfered with him, he would have to use force. Suddenly, something happened that he definitely did not expect. The girl handed him food. She shared it with him and gave him exactly half and kept the rest for herself. He took a piece and did not understand why she suddenly became so kind. But suddenly, she replied that he should have returned all the food to her in much larger quantities. Now it became clear that she had an ulterior motive from the very beginning. When he had finished his meal, he got up and was about to leave her. He was going to continue moving alone and did not want to take her with him. However, she did not want to be alone in such a situation and was going to go with him. She insisted that she knew the area and could navigate it well. Therefore, she was convinced that only she could navigate the area well. When the boy heard this, he turned around, and his words interested him very much. She explained that she had simply grown up in this city, and that one of the houses had once been her home. Having learned this, the main character decided that they needed to find the subway. The girl constantly watched him, but had to stay close to him. She understood that something was wrong with him. If she had known this earlier, she would not have shared bread with him. He explained that he wanted to go to the subway because it was safe there. After all, there were many things necessary for survival there. But most importantly, that in the subway it was much harder for a monster to catch up with and surround people. Now she had no doubt that he was strange. He spoke as if he knew something, but at the same time, even cookies were strange to him. They were in place. She tried to convince them that they needed to walk a little further to find the entrance. But he again did not believe her and believed that it was right below him. She started screaming. The children began to quarrel among themselves, not even noticing how a stranger had climbed up on them. He put his finger to his mouth and showed them not to make any noise. They were scared, but the old man tried to calm everyone down. The boy asked who he was and what he was doing in this place, but he didn't answer because time was short and they could meet later. Now he ordered them to follow him. He was from the subway and understood that it was his children who were trying to find him. Therefore, now he wanted to show them the real way. After some time, they approached the entrance to the subway. The main character had never seen this with his own eyes and could not believe that it was so huge. In addition, there were many other people inside. And so his theory turned out to be true. He made the right conclusions. There were a lot of people hiding in the subway, sitting right on the ground. The man said that he would never forget the moment when it all began. The monsters appeared very unexpectedly and immediately began to attack people. He understood that they had nowhere to run, and the fact that he managed to find this place was just luck. Sometimes he had to go up to the floor in order to find medicine. The boy listened to him and analyzed the situation. From the very beginning, he refused to stay in the subway, but now he saw that there were already too many people here who would interfere with him. He also noticed among the crowd of people who could not do anything and were simply crying. Most of them were injured and convinced that they would die. Also, among the crowd there were evil people who were ready to kill others for their own use. Therefore, staying in this place was very dangerous. But there was another very strange person in the crowd that he couldn't analyze. The more people there were around him, the riskier the situation became. However, he believed that there was no one among them who could threaten him in any way. Because on an instinctive level, he could recognize danger and understand which people could threaten him, which were safe. Just like with the monsters that were on the surface. Just like his father, who seemed to have taught him this, none of them made him feel safe. Meanwhile, the man decided to introduce himself and gave his name. His name was Hwang Biom, and he was a doctor. He replied that he was just looking for medicine on the surface and met them. At that time, they had very little time to get to know each other, so when he wanted to do it now, the boy looked at him with wide eyes. The girl gave her name and decided to get to know each other first. Her name was Haru. Judging by her clothes, it could be concluded that she studied at a technological school. The man knew a lot about this educational institution. After all, his hospital was not far from her and was located near a shopping mall. At this moment, he turned his attention to the boy, whose clothes were very strange. He realized that he had managed to go through a real horror because his appearance was very bad. But finally, when he asked his name, for a minute, the main character thought because he did not know what to answer him. In the end, he said that he did not have a name, or he simply did not know it. Looking at him, the doctor thought. He thought that the boy was very closed and therefore did not want to answer, but he did not even suspect that he was telling the truth. Suddenly, another guy ran up to him and said that things had only gotten worse. It was about a wounded man who had been suffering terrible torment for several days, but there was no medicine. The wound on his body was very serious, and the man's condition only worsened every day. It was clear that without surgical intervention, it was impossible to save him and help him. He woke up early infected, and in this case, the doctor had a lot of different tools for the operation. At first, he was going to treat the wound then. The main character constantly watched his actions, and he knew that there was such a profession as a doctor who treated other people for money. But in the current conditions, this was impossible, and Hwang did it for free. Suddenly, he asked how much he charged for treating these people. The man looked at him in surprise, and the patient immediately became very upset because he understood that he had absolutely no money to pay. However, Hwang replied that he was just trying to help others. He did not need money. He was a doctor, and his job was to treat people. So he was going to perform an operation and save his life. But before that, he tried to calm him down. He assured that almost all the operations were successful, and we should be afraid. At this moment, the patient rushed to him and began to hug. The main character could not understand why he helped him. He did it selflessly and did not receive anything in return for his help. He even thought that he was stupid. However, he did not believe that there were really good people who would be capable of such a thing. The doctor warned the patient that his bleeding could become stronger, but it seemed he was very suspicious. However, it was necessary to start the operation. Hwang warned that it might hurt, but he had to endure it. But he wasn't ready for this, and first I asked him to untie it. The doctor warned him that he couldn't move during the operation because everything could end very badly. The guy got very scared and tried to break free. He didn't believe that the doctor would be able to perform a real operation in such conditions. In addition, all this would happen without anesthesia, so he started screaming and tried to break free. The doctor tried to think of something and find a way to calm him down, but there were no drugs. The only thing he could do was hit him hard on the head. He apologized to the guy and then hit him on the head. Now, the main character realized that he was not wrong, and even people with good intentions were very dangerous. Finally, there was silence. It was the moment he had been waiting for the most. He thought he had made the right decision when he left there and decided to be alone. Now he was thinking about what he should do next. But all he had now was a piece of paper that his father had left him. It was a photograph from his childhood, on the back of which it was written that his mother was alive. He had nothing else, and this knowledge was not enough to understand where to look for her. But something about this photograph kept bothering him. There were strange, as if alien plants visible there. From the very beginning, they seemed very strange to him because he had read about such plants in his books. If these plants only grew in certain places, he would be able to find out where exactly they could be found. Therefore, for this, He needed to find a person who understood this. And this was the only clue that he simply could not lose. Therefore, he decided to ask everyone around about the flowers in the hope of finding the person who could understand. Suddenly, he managed to hear a familiar and the sound of a beetle flying near him. He intuitively strangled it with his own hands and tasted it because he always did it. The taste did not change, and it was very bitter. Meanwhile, on the surface, at the command of the man, a meeting was held, and soon everything was about to begin. The whole crowd was brought to a special room. He warned that everyone would definitely be there, and those who tried to resist would be punished. The people who were in one place did not understand why they were all gathered here. Others even started shouting because they did not believe that someone could command them without their permission. And they even started shouting at the leader, who had not paid any attention to them yet. But when the man looked at him, he began to tremble with fear and realized that he had made a terrible mistake. Because his opponent could understand what a person wanted. By a person's behavior, he could determine his thoughts and see fear. It was his fear that he saw in his eyes. His pupils dilated and he felt a tremor in his voice. The feeling was unbearable and haunted the man for a very long time. In addition, he understood that the boy was trying to cover up his feelings through aggression because his behavior was very angry. He began to scream and warn him not to come closer, but nevertheless, the man struck. From a strong blow, he flew several meters away from him and ended up on the ground. After that, the man approached him and lifted him in front of him. The boy trembled and finally admitted that, in fact, he was very scared. This is what his opponent wanted, so that the boy finally knew for himself that he was really scared and that he was trembling from just one look. He was lying on the ground and asked not to come near him. He was shaking and even started crying. A girl came to the boss and said that not everyone was here. She told him about the old doctor, the boy and the girl who didn't come to the meeting. He got angry because he couldn't believe that there were people who didn't listen to him. Besides, he wanted to punish the doctor because he never listened to him. And now he was completely lost and no one could contact him. The leader decided to do it himself. So he went to the subway to find these people and look into their faces. He ordered the beaten boy to be tied up and thrown outside because he was no longer allowed to live among people. He promised to do anything just to stay. However, it was too late. It was impossible to disobey the leader's order. Meanwhile, the main character felt terribly tired. He realized that he hadn't been breathing at all for the past few days, due to the constant need to protect himself from monsters. Now he felt that something strange was happening to him because he was scared. His head had a huge number of thoughts, and he found himself in some incomprehensible place. He stepped on his feet, but did not feel the ground under them. It seemed that the environment was pulling him in. The guy even began to panic and tried to get out of here, but he realized that it was too late, because now he had already been absorbed. Incomprehensible tentacles attacked his body and prevented him from moving. The guy started running, but I understand that they are getting close to his head and very soon he will simply suffocate. Suddenly, he woke up and realized that it was a very realistic dream. During the battle, he saw unknown people who surrounded him and looked straight into his eyes. He did not know who they were and why they were looking at him now. However, he was told that he had 2 minutes to get to the center of the building where the meeting was taking place. And if he did not do this, he would be kicked out of the subway and he would end up on the street. People watched his actions and some of them began to laugh. The leader was interested in watching who was hiding in this place. But now, he realized that he did not see anything interesting here. What the hell? I asked if they were really going to kick him out. It seemed like he didn't understand the whole serious situation he was in. He didn't even realize that he was the head of this subway, who was dangerous. Even at that moment, I remembered my father and trust in people. Besides, he couldn't imagine that he could be kicked out of here at all. With his behavior, he angered the men. The wind started laughing. He didn't tell him to look him straight in the eye, but the boy immediately did it and looked up. He wasn't scared at all and looked straight at him. The man continued to look at the boy, but he did not lower his gaze. This behavior made him very angry, and now he had problems. Suddenly, he replied that 2 minutes was enough for him to deal with them all. Hearing this, the people started laughing at him. One of them took out a knife and began to threaten him with violence. But the leader quickly calmed him down and put his hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, the boy realized that his photo was nowhere to be found and he started looking for it in his pockets. As it turned out, the men had found him, and now it was in their hands. The enemies began to mock him and tease the photo they were holding. The boy got angry. He got up and threatened that if there was even one scratch on it, he would kill him. But his words did not scare the enemy, and he did not stop fighting. Suddenly, the ice took the photo and was about to tear it, so he ordered the boy to come closer to him. And when the boy really came closer, they started beating him. He took cover from their blows. They continued to do this and laughed at him, threatening to tear the photo. The main character was angry with himself for losing the photo while he was sleeping. After all, he knew that people were much more dangerous than monsters and could never be trusted. Now the enemies were trying to decide what to do with him and whether it was worth expelling him. But the leader assured him that they would not expel him from here. He explained that when he examined his eyes, he saw something unusual there. He was different from other people. His soul and behavior were completely different. He could not even see anything because his soul was very deep. They promised to watch him and leave the photo intact. In addition, the men understood that it was impossible to leave the photo unattended. Many men could not believe that they would really do this for him, but it was the leader's order. He realized that when the boy was going to attack him, he himself was even a little scared. But now, it made no difference. He continued to marry the boy and laughed at him, holding the same photo in his hands. Suddenly, a girl witnessed this. She approached the people and could not understand what they were doing. The wind looked at her and realized that now she did not need to look for her, because she had already come to them herself. The girl could not believe that they were trying to find her, and when they approached her, she began to scream. In addition, she saw the main character, whose husband was also surrounded and not allowed to pass. They were about to leave, but the boy remained in the same place and sat on the ground, not moving. The girl watched him and reached out her hand because she wanted to help him, but he hid her hand, not allowing her to reach him. His behavior made the girl very angry because she just wanted to help him and did not understand what she had done wrong.